Many people ask me, how do you have a passion for death and grief? You've all probably heard that quote, live every day as if it was your last. It sounds great, right? But let me ask you something. How can we live every day as if it was our last if we've never really truly thought about what it means to actually die? Who in this room has thought about your own death? Or even, nice, that's great. Or even worse, the death of people that you love. How do you want to die? What's your funeral going to look like? Who's going to be there? What are they going to say about you? Have you talked to anybody about what's going to be done with your body and your possessions? And is this the last message you want to send to the world? You know, many of us haven't thought about this because death can bring some of the most excruciating times to our lives, but they're also some of the most important. And the ways in which we address our own mourning and death process can have an amazing effect on the way that we live our lives. You know, going back as a child, I really didn't understand death very much. I mean, nobody talked to me about it in a very truthful or meaningful way. The only thing I knew about cemeteries was the tombstones that they put on our lawns at Halloween. And you know, it wasn't until recently that so many support groups have actually surfaced for children. You know, we've had events like Columbine and the rate of teenage suicide, and now we're actually talking about death in schools. When I was 15, one of my very best friends called me late at night and said she really needed to talk. And like many other 15-year-old girls, I was on the other line with my boyfriend, and I said, I'll call you back. But I fell asleep, and I never called her back. And the next morning, she killed herself. As you can imagine, I was in excruciating pain, total shock. She really was like a sister to me. But the fact that I had to go to her funeral even felt like more punishment. I mean, I was terrified to see her in the casket, and I just didn't know what I was going to say to her parents. But when I got to the funeral, I remember sitting in a very uncomfortable chair most of the day. And although there were flowers everywhere, I hated the way the place smelled. And I didn't know how to take part in the conversations about how good or peaceful she looked in the casket. But I remember at one point seeing a doorway in the back hallway of that funeral home, and I imagined that behind that door, there was an empty room and a stack of white porcelain plates. I imagined myself going into this room, slamming the door and screaming as loud as I could while I threw every last plate against the wall. But at the time, I didn't want to be another angry teenager. So I went back to school, and I still had to take my algebra test on Friday. It's strange, like when I think back to that time, I pushed it away so much. And I think I imagined that she didn't die or that she didn't even exist. I just buried it. And then by college, I probably drank it all away. But for years, I lived with this unbelievable amount of anxiety and fear and shame. That if I didn't call somebody back, that if I didn't follow through with something, that something catastrophic was going to happen and it was going to be my fault. So, like 10 years later, I was in a therapy session, and my therapist looked at me and said, "Why do you carry all this weight?" And it was that moment I just started bawling, crying, weeping. I couldn't even explain to him what I was crying about. But this just opened up this amazing healing for me, and I started to remember her. I started to realize how much I actually miss this girl. And this process is still happening for me today. It was really humbling, and it really just helped me to understand the power of grief and how important Good Mourning is. So also in high school, I worked in an assisted living center, and in college, I studied gerontology. So gerontology is the study of the social, psychological, and biological aspects of aging. So for many years, I've had the opportunity to work with many older adults who are close to their own death. And these people really became my teachers and my elders. So whether I was rubbing lotion on their wrinkled backs, studying their lives, or even going to their funerals, one thing that I took away from that experience is that life goes by fast, and before we know it, it's over. So until recently, you would have found me living on boats or islands. I took surfing trips to Indonesia. I went to India and meditated in ashrams for months. I kayaked in the Arctic. I followed whales in Alaska. And in Brazil, I danced until I couldn't walk. I took a job working on the National Geographic Expedition ships. This was an amazing time for me. I traveled all over the world, and I led thousands of people through rivers, oceans, and trails. And I can remember thinking, I think I did it. You know, working with those older adults, I kind of became a passion junkie. I thought I really wanted to get this life right, and they really helped me to do this. And for years, I lived in the self-help and travel sections of bookstores. I always thought that happiness was somewhere over there. And it was something to be sought after. And I thought that if I was passionate enough about it, that I would attain it. So these moments on the boat, I felt all set. I mean, I wasn't concerned about society's expectations or money. And I wasn't in college or anything. I was well into my 30s, and I was surrounded by people in their 40s, 50s, 60s, and 70s who were all on the same boat living their passions. Then one day off the coast of Alaska, the captain said that I had an emergency phone call. And I picked up the phone, and it was my best friend, Angela, weeping on the other line. And she said, "Sam's dead." Sam was Angela's brother. These two had a remarkable relationship, something that I've never seen between two siblings. And in that moment, I remember looking around my small cabin, and I was trying to look for a way to claw myself out of that room. And I just kept thinking, how is she ever going to get through this? So less than a year later from that moment, I found myself standing in a cold refrigeration facility at a funeral home. I looked down at my legs, and I couldn't believe I was wearing pantyhose. My upper body wasn't tired from a day out in the water, but from the stack of death certificates that I held in my hands. I left one passion for another, and this passion is death. So when I got that call, I got on the first flight that I could to help Angela and her family. Sam was just 28 years old when he died, and his death was a very tragic and unexpected accident. They had him cremated and scattered him over his favorite climbing spot, Chapel Hill. It's where he first learned to climb. Throughout these days, neighbors opened up their homes and spare bedrooms to strangers. We all went to Sam's favorite places. We drank his favorite beer. In Sam's father's beautiful backyard, we had a barbecue. There was flowers, objects representing his life. Children ran and played while Sam's girlfriend laid in the grass and cried. His eulogy, it was delivered organically by all of his closest friends. His family did such an amazing job of emulating his stubbornness, his honesty, and Sam was funny. There was some funny jokes being thrown around for those 3 days. And he was a remarkable musician, so music was celebrated. They brought out his instruments and they played them. It was a tragic time, but his life was celebrated in a way that resonated with his family. So throughout this time, it was a very powerful experience for me because it seemed like I was always in the right spot at the right time. I mean, people were relying on me throughout those days. And not only was I helping with the logistics, but I was also helping people get through those moments of grief where they thought they couldn't make it through another second. I would remind them to laugh, to cry, to be silent, to be angry, and most of all, to just absorb the love and support that was around them to get them through the hard times ahead. At one point, I looked over at Sam's 15-year-old sister, Magali. She was on the porch arranging flowers. And I looked at her and I thought, wow, what a different experience, that she's having that from my experience at 15. I wish that I could go back and help my 15-year-old self. She was so sad, but yet her pain and uncertainty and grief had a really supportive space to be present. Sam's memorial was amazing in the way that there was ritual. His friends got together and made a raven made out of paper feathers and scrap wood. And at night, we had a bonfire, and we lit it on fire. It was huge. It was awesome. And then, when it was time for us to sleep, we all slept in the same room that Sam had died in, because being closer to his death actually helped us all feel closer to his life. After the memorial, I stayed after with Sam's family and helped pack up some of his clothes and belongings. I painted the room where he passed away. And, of course, they thanked me for all my help. But I realized that I had a gift, that I could support people in a time of turmoil, and I could create spaces for grief and mourning. So when I got back on the boat, as you can imagine, my daily life there just lacked the authenticity that I felt at Sam's memorial. I started to feel a deeper passion for my own friends and family. I really wanted a life that was more grounded and real. Suddenly the machinations of expedition travel and the travails of the boat guests just seemed less important and unfulfilling. And when I found myself up late at night studying funeral law in my cabin, I thought, am I crazy? Really? This is it? But I knew I had to get off the boat. So I moved to San Francisco and began planning funerals, memorials, and sea scatterings for families. I've had the opportunity to work with hundreds of families who've lost loved ones. And I can tell you to this day that this has been the most passionate and touching time of my life. I've been around painful family feuds. I've learned more about how addiction and disease can kill. A few times I've had to send bodies off to the crematory alone because they had no family or friends to claim them. But I'll tell you, there's been a lot of love. In Nino Sancevich's book, Tolstoy and the Purple Chair, she writes, "The only balm to the pain of losing someone we love is celebrating the life that existed before." This family here taught me a lot about the importance of celebrating life. The baby you see in this photo is Jesse. Jesse's being held by his parents, Trish and Star. This photo's beautiful, right? It was taken the first time they were actually able to hold him. Right when the umbilical cord was cut, they realized that Jesse had a very serious constellation of birth defects. Trish and Star gave themselves ultimately and lovingly and fully in the face of letting them go. The three of them had 19 days together, and they removed him from life support. You know, as you can imagine, when they got back to their normal life, I mean, people don't know what to say to you. It's tragic. Death isn't this intuitive thing that we know how to deal with. We need help. We need to know what to say to people so we can give them the support they need. People said things to them like, "You'll have another," or that maybe Jessie was in a better place now, or they asked when she was going to try again. Throughout all the unaware things that people said to them, they would say, "Let's not forget that my son lived. Jesse had a life, and his life was important." Those 19 days were the most profound days of their lives. Yet nobody asked them the color of his hair or eyes. You know, so often we don't ask people about the people that they've lost because we don't want to make people revisit their grief. But life is important, and people want to talk about the people that they've loved and lost. And the more comfortable we can all get with our own fear of death and our own uncomfortableness with mourning and grief, the more space and help we can provide for people. And you know, we do need to be sensitive to culture and people's personalities. Some people need us to just simply sit with them in silence. And they're not going to be as emotive as others. But we still need to provide that space. We still need to take death out of the closet and talk about it. You know, if I could give you one word, what I felt working with these families, it would be honored. I've learned so much about love and life. I remember working with one woman at a funeral, and she was standing over her father's casket, and she looked at me and said, "It's strange. Now that he's dead, I feel like I'm finally starting to forgive him, but I wish I would have told him how much he hurt me." I remember one woman who's 81, and her mom, who was 102, died. And we were signing the legal cremation paperwork, and she looked at me and said, "You know, she started to cry. She said, I know I look like an old woman to you, but I feel like a little girl, and I'm so sad." She said, "No matter how old I get, when I hurt, I still want my mom." One man told me explicitly about the last and first time he kissed his wife and how she smelled like lavender both times. And yes, I met a woman who told me she wished she would have left the dishes dirty in the sink and made love to her husband one last time before he left for work and never came home. You know, death is so important. Celebrating life is important. And celebrating life doesn't mean we deny ourselves the reality of death, but it honors the people that we've loved and lost, and it honors the pain and grief that comes with this loss. Many of us are living so far away from our families and friends that not only do we have to leave the funeral process up to strangers, but we're also left to grieve on our own too, right? We need to ask ourselves, how can we prepare for this journey? How can we get and give the support that we need? This is why I'm working on an organization called Good Mourning. In my vision, the funerals and memorials that we create for one another will help us look at how precious life is, and will also give us the strength that we need to get through it. I'm just amazed that in this day and age that we're not more prepared for this. We're all going to die here. And yet just moments after you get the worst call of your life, you have to plan an event that you don't want to go to. You have to start shopping around for funeral homes and cremation services. Get out your calculator, figure out how much it's going to cost. Start calling caterers and hotels, and then start thinking about final will and asset distribution. My organization is going to help people deal with these details. We need better funerals. Why don't we have child psychologists on hand to help explain to these children what's going on? We need grief massage therapists that know how to touch mourning bodies. You know, rather than having bereavement groups that are hard to access and lead to sterile rooms, we should be taking people out into nature, or maybe meeting them in the comfort of their own homes. We need more compassionate legal and financial advice. You know, it's strange because when people talk about funerals, they always say it's something that they forgot, right? They say, oh, I don't even remember the funeral. I mean, I just was in shock and I was just getting through it. I want to create a funeral that will actually help people get through those times. So rather than running out on some pursuit of passion, I want to ask you to look at your whole life right now. Knowing that your heart will stop beating one day, heal yourself and your relationships because you have no control over death and you might miss the opportunity. And yes, go home tonight and kiss your husband or wife tonight as if it was the last kiss, because it might be. And your children, play with your children, accept them, love them. Don't get so caught up in how great you need to make them, but just thank them every day for all that they've given you. And start talking to them about death. Start preparing them for your death. You'd be amazed at some of those conversations that come out of it. You know, the truth is that many of us in this room are probably grieving right now. Losing someone to death is some of the worst grief, right? But we've all lost jobs, relationships, our health. We're just searching for parts of ourselves that we've left behind. And many of us are so busily pursuing our passions in such a rush that we don't have time to actually sit with our pain and who we really are. What if buried in our pain, we can find the passion that we've left behind? And living with our whole selves, the joy and the pain, we can find a passion more immense and deeper than anything out there and beyond. So just remember, life and death are two sides of the same coin. So celebrate the lives of the people you've loved and lost, because they are living inside you. And becoming closer to the reality of death could just be one gateway to passion, and that which we already have. Thank you.